Welcome back to Beats on SABC Lihaye. As parties look forward to their election prospects and those invested try to divide which way things will go, some research is giving shape to that thinking. A recent poll touted as the largest yet of voter sentiment states that the governing ANC is losing popularity and would likely bag only 39% of the votes if elections were held tomorrow. Let us now bring in political analyst Asanda Washeng. Asanda, good morning and welcome to Pitso. And Asanda, welcome to Pitso. Let's talk about this poll. What do you make of it?
Thanks for having me. I think, the poll had some interesting points to make. I agree with what it said about an old world dying and a new world emerging, but I don't agree, for instance, in terms of some of the numbers that they've given. They were saying that, the ANC is going to get quite low numbers and the DA is going to retain its position as the second biggest opposition with the EFF tailing behind. I think that the ANC, yes, is going to decline or lose some of its support, but not to the point that it gets to the 30%. I think it's still going to be in the high 40%, which gives it the opportunity to be in coalition with one of the other smaller parties. I think we're likely to see potentially political parties like the UDM, which has really been struggling, potentially fall away or fall away even further. And we also likely to see the EFF, I think, could emerge as the biggest opposition party, replacing the Democratic Alliance, who is definitely in decline. Because what we've seen in the last election of 2021 is that people want the ANC out, but people also want the DA out because the current push is against the incumbent. So the DA, as people who are dominant in the Western Cape and have been the governing party in the Western Cape for a long time, people are tired of them, and they lost at the last election about 5% of the support, and so they're likely to decline further. While the ANC at a national level also lost quite a chunk of their percentage, they're likely to lose even further, but not, as I said, to the point that has been predicted in the poll. But I certainly agree that there is an old world that is dying and the new world is really struggling. And the reason for that is because political parties, opposition political parties, have not been able to convince people that they are the better deal. So a lot of people are tired of the ANC, a lot of people are tired of ANC corruption, and they no longer want to necessarily be governed by the ANC. But what is stopping the ANC from the decline that it could have is that there is no alternative that people feel they can trust. So within the DA, for instance, the racism that we've seen coming out of the DA, they're constantly removing every other black leader that seems like they are emerging before they actually make it to the top. This is one of the things that make the voters to not trust the DA. And it's very sad because the DA seems to not understand that we are a majority black country. And so they need to connect with black voters in order for them to continue to have a chunk of the South African electorate voting for them, because the numbers of white people, colored people, Indian people who are usually their voters are not enough on their own. And if you look at how the voters have responded to the issue of the DA supporting Israel, while the ANC has been pushing as a government for the freedom of Palestine, that's something that has placed the ANC ahead of the DA in terms of being for social justice, and also I think just in terms of being a government that isn't afraid to be bold on a global stage and isn't afraid to do the opposite of what the rest of the world is doing, just because it believes in social justice. And that is something that has revived, I think, also some interest in people who were kind of tired of the ANC and felt like it didn't have its old values. And so what we saw with the ICJ and the government action there has led to some people saying, actually, maybe the ANC of the old is back in terms of values, in terms of standing up for what's right. And the MK, while it had the potential to decrease the vote of the ANC. I think that in some ways it actually may have had the opposite effect, which is that it may have made some who were not so sure about the ANC now want to go and vote for the ANC in order to protect our democracy and in order to show people like Jacob Zuma that they didn't like what Jacob Zuma and his cronies,
Asanda.
the economic, the RT, wanted essentially.
Asanda, you mentioned the fact that the EFF is likely to go past, or I mean, go past the DA and become the main opposition party, to the African National Congress. If that happens, if the EFF is now the main opposition party, how will that change the political landscape in the country?
Well, I think if you have an EFF as the main political party, first of all, you will have youth voices that are in the lead because the political party is known for having groundswell support within voices. One of the spaces where it's actually grown the most is on university campuses. So university campuses that used to easily belong to the ANC now belong to the EFF, and they've even managed to chase down, some universities like UCT at some point where DASO strongholds, but now the EFF has been giving a strong showing in the SRC elections, particularly in the post Fees Must Fall, Roads Must Fall era. And so this is where the EFF's growth has been the most. And if you look at the percentage of voters, it is young people who haven't been voted. And if young people stand up and get registered and do end up going to the polls, they're more likely, particularly black young people, are more likely to vote for the EFF than the ANC or the DA for that matter. And so I think when the EFF becomes the main opposition, it's going to change our politics, because you saw with the entrance of Coke, for example, as a black opposition party, that it changed the kind of conversation that we are having, it changed the tone of the conversations that we're having, and it changed the direction of the conversations that we're having. Because you must remember that for as long as South Africa has a mainly white interest party like the DA as the main opposition, they will forever be pushing white interest and pushing for us to have conversations that are important for white citizens in South Africa. But if you have a political party like the EFF now becoming second in charge, you're going to begin to see issues like the land question that's still unsolved coming up quite strongly. We're going to see the black condition being discussed a lot more. So, for instance, I often talk about how, we talk about South Africa having high unemployment, but actually what it is that black people are unemployed in high numbers. The other race groups or ethnicities still have far higher numbers compared to black people. So while you have colored and Indian people who do suffer from unemployment, it's not in the same numbers as black people. And white people even have a lower percentage of unemployed citizens. And so when the EFF is in power, or is in power as the opposition, essentially, we're likely to see more of those issues that affect black people that haven't had the space, that haven't had the time to be further explored and further engaged with. And I think this will be good for South Africa, because for a change we'll be having conversations that have to do with the majority and the needs of the majority, rather than ensuring that our political discourse is about the needs of a minority that is increasingly immigrating out of the country in any case. That's why you'll see, for instance, the DA is now pushing for a higher, for more votes overseas, because more of the people who support them are no longer in the country, which tells you about their state. If you are a country that has more voters outside of the country than inside of the country, that is a state of a dying country, because the longer people are away from the country, the less interested they are in South African politics, and the less they are going to actually go as far as putting ahead the vote. I was looking at numbers the other day. It said something like Australia has about 200,000 plus South Africans, but only about 1,000, just over 1,000, seem to be registered. And the DA was pushing that the government must increase the number of voting stations in Australia in order for them to be able to get the votes that they want. Which, as I say, if you are a country based in South Africa, if you're a political party based in South Africa, but you are busy lobbying people who are outside side of the country because they voted with their feet essentially and have left. So that is the state that's happening. It is a dying old world, but the new world is really struggling. And opposition parties, I've said this many times, that, for all of the ANC's failures, opposition parties keep failing to take over from the ANC because they just are not providing themselves as a viable alternative. And until that is the case, the ANC is going to continue to win despite the unhappiness that people feel. That's why people even make, statement like the ANC voters are like, they have battered wife syndrome, because it doesn't matter how bad things get. People continue to go back to them because the alternatives seem, for South Africans anyway, to be far worse than being able to remove the ANC. And unfortunately, for a political party like the DA, their stance on Israel doesn't help things at all. People are now talking about being fearful that if the DA gets into power, they are going to push for us to go back to apartheid. And while it may seem laughable on the face of it, when you look at the fact that the DA is pushing
Asanda,
policies like the independence of Cape Town, then people's fears become real and become, easy to understand how they come to these conclusions.
Asanda, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but thank you so much for joining us this morning on Pitso. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me.
That is Asanda Washeng, a political analyst, talking to us about a recent survey which suggests that if elections were to be held in the next week, the ANC would only get 39% of the vote. For now, let us go to the break. We're going to come back after this.